call it long overdue, the president keeping his campaign promises. However you see it, it is a fundamental shift in domestic policy, and millions of lives could be about to change. We'll talk about that tonight. So we begin with the new guidelines, and CNN Justice correspondent Pamela Brown joins us for that. So explain these new guidelines and what they do.
Well, these new DHS guidelines, Anderson, could massively expand the number of undocumented immigrants detained and deported. So nearly all of the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States could be subject to deportation. Now, the White House has said this is not supposed to be a mass roundup of undocumented immigrants. However, Sean Spicer, the White House spokesperson, also said, though, now under these new guidelines, anyone who is in the U.S. illegally could be subject to removal at any time. And to sum up how things have changed, under the Obama administration, there were three priorities. There were the convicted criminals, public safety threats, those who cross the border illegally. But now under these new guidelines, an undocumented immigrant who is charged with a crime, such as a DUI, could be subject for removal. And the memos, these marching orders, give ICE agents broader discretion now. So essentially, if they're going after an undocumented immigrant who is a criminal and there happens to be another undocumented immigrant with that person, they can round up everyone there and put them through the deportation proceedings. Now, the White House does say there is a group that is not impacted by these sweeping changes, and that would be the Dreamers. That would be the undocumented immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children. For now, the White House says those protections remain in place for them. Anderson.
The memos also outline changes in use of laws that are already in place. So what is going to change?
That's right. So basically, what the DHS did today is send out guidelines to be used under the existing laws. And so what they do is in the so-called catch and release, which is releasing people in the U.S. unlawfully as they await for their proceedings. So in some cases, that could be a couple of years. But now the Trump administration is ending that whole process and basically boosting expedited removal. So people who have been in the U.S. for 2 years or less, expediting their removal, and in some cases not even having them go before a judge. So these are some of the key changes, and they're also making it harder for asylum seekers to remain in the United States while they wait for their proceedings. So there are a number of big changes, and DHS Secretary John Kelly is going to Mexico and Guatemala this week to talk about these changes and to talk about border security. Anderson?
All right, Pam Brown, thanks. More now on what these changes mean and the repercussions that could follow. Joining us is Leon Rodriguez, former director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the agency that actually administers the immigration naturalization system. Also with us is CNN political analyst Kirsten Powers, CNN Homeland Security analyst Juliet Kayyem, CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, and Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz. Leon, let's start with you, since you know this backwards and forwards. I mean, the bottom line here, what is the biggest change? Because it seems like the definition of who a criminal is has just expanded.
Certainly, the definition of who is a deportable criminal, that has expanded, but also the order in its totality really makes anybody who is here unlawfully immediately removable if they encounter an agent. So the devil is going to be in the details. The devil is going to be in how this is implemented in reality. Do they adhere to the priorities that they've stated? Or do they, in fact, use this as a marching order to deport anybody that...
And the rise in the number of ICE agents, how significant is that?
That certainly will increase the ability to remove people, but there's other things that have to happen here. You're going to need to expand detention space. You're going to need to increase the number of judicial immigration judge resources in order to effectuate those proceedings. That money's got to come from somewhere. Right now, we don't know where that is.
And Kirsten, I mean, the White House is saying Dreamers, as Pam Brown mentioned, are not included in.
Yeah, which is interesting because this was an area where Republicans were so critical of Barack Obama on the Dreamers, in fact, calling it unlawful. This is something that they were probably the most up in arms about. And so it's interesting that he chose to keep that, which I think is a good thing. But the rest of it, I think, is probably causing a lot of fear and panic among undocumented immigrants right now, because under President Obama, the priority really was the worst of the worst, the criminals, the people who are posing a danger to society, versus now, as Pamela Brown was talking about, even if they didn't do the quote-unquote mass deportations, which I think they probably will, they're already catching people in these sweeps. So where they normally would go to a house to, say, arrest one person for drug trafficking, and there's a bunch of other college students there, you know, and they'll say, well, we're just going to let you stay. And now they'll probably sweep them up.
Professor Dershowitz, I mean, the memos seem to reinforce giving broad leeway to immigration officers or even local law enforcement to make immediate decisions about who to arrest. It seems to be left up to the individual making that arrest in many cases.
That's right. And look, this is a very clever tact by the Trump administration. They have created a far more legally defensible, if morally questionable, approach. After all, the job of the executive is enforcement, and the courts give enormous power to executives making enforcement decisions. Rulemaking, on the other hand, is a quasi-legislative function, and the courts do not defer as much to the executive when it makes rules like the rule it made a few weeks ago. So this is lawyers at work. They have told the administration, you want to achieve your goals, achieve it through administrative actions. They're going to be much harder to review. They're going to be reviewed retail rather than wholesale. And the people on the other side are going to have to come up with a legal strategy that's going to be much more difficult and creative and uphill in order to challenge this highly questionable order, because it's legally on much more solid grounds.
Jeff, obviously, you know, Democrats, immigration rights activists are up in arms about this, but let's be clear. I mean, Donald Trump talked about this repeatedly as a candidate. This doesn't seem that it should be much of a surprise to just about anybody. I mean, he's fulfilling a campaign promise.
No, one of the lines that supposedly sophisticated people used during the campaign is, you know, you should take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally. It's increasingly apparent that we should take Donald Trump literally. He said he wanted more people deported. He's going to have more people deported. And I think Alan is right that legally he is on solid ground here, because, you know, the whole idea behind immigration law has been that we can't deport all 11 million people at once. So you have to have priorities, and you have to decide whom you're going to deport. But if you put more resources and fewer restrictions on ICE, you're going to deport more people. And Trump is going to deport more people.
Juliet, you say for those who are worried about mass deportations that the sky isn't falling here. Explain that.
Well, I think there is reason to be concerned, as everyone's been saying, in terms of enforcement priorities. The floor has been lowered. So where the Obama administration said, you know, the worst of the worst, this now seems open. But in terms of how people think of mass deportation, that all of a sudden there's going to be these sweeps, there's nothing in the guidelines that say that. And so this is where we have to figure out, how is this going to be operationalized? Now, the Trump people are, and the new rules are going to bump up against a lot of things. Money, where is the money to get all of this? State and local sort of pushback. A lot of big city mayors do not like this. They like to integrate their immigrant communities, governors as well. And so you're going to have cost issues, legal issues, as well as where I think the big pushback is going to be these mayors and governors who are going to say, we don't want these ICE agents in here doing this. And so while the rules have changed, the enforcement, we're just going to have to wait and see. I don't mean to minimize these changes, but we're not at the sky is falling yet.
Professor Dershowitz, one of the interesting things, I mean, I remember talking to the mayor of Los Angeles, and I've talked to other mayors who say, just from a law enforcement standpoint, they actually want illegal immigrants, undocumented workers, feeling comfortable approaching the police, reporting other crimes, or you know, talking about, you know, witnessing. If they've witnessed a crime, they want them to be comfortable to come in and not fear that they come in to talk about something they've seen, they're going to end up being deported, that this might, they're worried this may have ripple effects, unintended consequences.
I think they're absolutely right. I think this is driving people underground. People are not going to pay their tickets. They're not going to come for other services. They're not going to tell the police if they see something. Obviously, they're going to have to live in a gray area for a long, long period of time. Also, we're going to see the conflict now with sanctuary cities. That's going to bring this to a head, because there are going to be some cities who are going to say, no, we're not going to cooperate. This is immoral. This is illegal. There are going to be legal challenges. Remember, I've said on your show before, there's a new check and balance on the president, and it's called States and Cities. They are becoming very energized to bring lawsuits the way Minnesota and Washington did, and other states are considering doing. Attorneys general of the states are going to become the new heroes of the movement to try to slow this down. So we're in for an interesting ride in the courts and in politics.
Anderson, if I can just add one point to what Alan was saying. When you talk about these sanctuary cities, what the Republicans in the House of Representatives and President Trump have also said is that if you want to protect people who are undocumented in your communities, you're not going to get any federal money. You're not going to get money for your subways. You're not going to get money for your hospitals. Right. So will they really cut off money to these cities? And if they do, what will the cities do in response? That's an issue that's going to be out there soon.
Leon, though, there is, I mean, under these guidelines, there's a lot of discretion in the hands of local law enforcement, state law, of the law enforcement officers deciding who they wanted to deport.
Well, there is in the sense that it reinstitutes the 287G program, which actually will expand the pool of non-criminal aliens.
287G program?
Yeah, and that's the program where basically local law enforcement officers are deputized to act with the same authority as ICE officers. That's something that was used in the Bush administration, then eliminated in the Obama administration in preference for a much more strategic approach.
All right. Professor Dershowitz, Leon Rodriguez, appreciate you joining the panel. We'll have more with our other panelists, more on the political repercussions of all of this, and there could be plenty when we come back. Later, President Trump speaking out against anti-Semitism and why one Jewish group likens it to putting a Band-Aid on a cancer patient.